for hours, basically. So without further ado, my very first member in Network in Action is Hannah Nasser. Hannah, I met her my wife and I were thinking about buying a home probably a year and a half ago. Hannah was on the set, she was doing an open house, we get to know each other. About 3 weeks later, I get this knock on my door, I just see this lady walk into the neighborhood, it's Hannah. And I said, oh my gosh, Hannah, I said, kudos to you for going out knocking on doors like you do, but that's a tough thing to do. I said, I'm starting a business networking group, I'd love to have you get involved. And Hannah was actually my first member, so let me turn, Hannah's a realtor here in Edmond, so.
So Hannah Nasser, I'm with Real Broker, and like Clayton said, I've been with the networking group for a while. I think we've probably going on a year now, and I really love it. I'm about my 4th year into real estate, so connecting with other people, as you all know, is really important, and it's been a big blessing. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today about how real estate can be a really good option when planning for your retirement. So does anybody in here own any rental properties already? Or okay, perfect. How's that going for you?
Pretty good. My sister rents for me.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask.
Sometimes that's the worst big family, you know?
Absentee
Right. So a few different reasons why someone would choose real estate instead of your typical kind of stocks, 401ks, investments. One of them being the passive income that it can bring you. So by purchasing rental properties in high demand areas and renting it out for a little bit more than what you're paying in your mortgage and expenses can get you that monthly passive cash flow. So that's a really good thing. And then of course the appreciation and leverage that it brings you long term. So in Oklahoma, we have a pretty good appreciation rate. It's still a really good moving market, about 4 to 5% year over year. So this is a really good place to consider either starting your investment or, like increasing that portfolio. And then of course, tax benefits, deductions, utilizing something called the 1031 exchange strategy. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that, but it's essentially like selling one of your real estate properties, immediately putting the proceeds into another real estate property, being able to kind of defer paying those capital gains taxes. So for a lot of investors, you can do, where you purchase and flip and you want to sell, immediately put it back in. So that's a really good idea. And then of course we have like the homestead exemption, which is save you about $1,000 after you purchase your property and your next taxes. And then of course building your legacy and your inheritance wealth. When you have a real estate property, you keep it in, things like an LLC or a trust. You're really protecting all of your personal assets, and you're also making it a lot easier to transfer that wealth, whether it's to your children or you're selling it to a partner. But it's a lot easier when instead of you have stocks, you have bonds. You don't really want to pass those off to your kids. You want to cash in and move on. So whatever your kind of plan is, this is a lot easier to pass down your legacy. And I mean, it is a house, so if your family ever needs somewhere to live, they can live in it. Don't need to cash in on it. So those are just kind of 4 of the benefits that would differentiate from other real estate plans or retirement plans, excuse me. So the 3 pillars of retirement, again being the cash flow, so the difference between what your rental income is and then what you're spending. The second is your equity growth, so buying in your high growing areas and leveraging that appreciation so you can get your quick money, you can get your long-term money. And then of course your exit strategies, so how you tap into those that equity and that capital. So you can sell your properties, you can refinance your properties, and then of course you can just keep them rented out for that cash flow. But so those are the 3 main ways that you would look to make money with those real estate plans. Not so much flipping properties and buying and fixing them up isn't necessarily going to be your long-term plan unless you have a bigger plan to then just put that capital, if that makes sense. So buying and holding is a little bit more of that long-term plan. It can help you, save all of that equity and then cash in at the end if you want. So creating a retirement plan. There's a lot of different ways that you can purchase real estate. There's a lot of different ways that you can make your money. But defining those goals up front. So whether that is generating steady monthly income to cover living in retirement, which is what a lot of people prefer to do, or just accumulating those large amounts of assets to then cash in when you do retire and just, taking all that money and running off to the Bahamas. Whatever you want to do, those are kind of your two choices when it comes to your retirement plans. And then of course setting those milestones. So how many properties do you want to buy? How often do you want to buy them? Setting those plans up front and really getting a clear plan can save you a lot of hassle from that analysis paralysis of like, there's so many options, what do you do? And of course, choosing the right strategy. So again, there's a lot of different ways you can invest, but I would suggest sticking to one of these avenues. So one of them being like a single family home, which is your everyday one family home you can rent out and, make your yearly money. You can do multifamilies depending on, what your living situation is. So something like a duplex or an apartment complex. Sometimes single young people can buy a duplex and live on one side and rent out the other and kind of house hack that. But of course, if you have 4 kids, probably not ideal, live right next door to someone. All just kind of depends on what your situation is. And then of course you can go the commercial route, which would be something like maybe buying a retail spot, renting out those offices, or doctor's offices. There's all kinds of places that you can do those commercial properties and rent those out as well. I will say commercial typically takes a little bit more capital up front, but can be a really strong return. And then residential can be a little bit more of a easier balance to get in. And then with the residential, you can do short-term or long-term. So short-term would be something like an Airbnb or a Verbo. Long-term would be, your yearly leases, your 6-month leases, your long-term. And then of course, determining which one you want to go, your location is very crucial. So if you decide to go an Airbnb route, you want to make sure you're investing in somewhere that is maybe like a tourist attraction, or if you have a really unique property that someone would like to come and stay in for that fun vacation, that location is really crucial. Then of course, if you go like the long-term route, maybe choosing somewhere with a good college town or a good school district where families are going to want to go and live there for long periods of time. And then analyzing the cash flow and the expenses that those properties can bring you as well. So sometimes people don't take into consideration things like high property taxes and high insurance rates. So those are definitely part of those, analyzing those properties and kind of where you decide to invest. And then of course HOAs are a big thing too that a lot of people don't take into consideration. You can buy it in there and you think you rented it out, and then at the end of the year you get your $1,500 HOA bill. So definitely taking in those considerations, all those expenses up front, really important. You don't want to regret it later on. Then of course, financing your portfolio. So obviously this is probably the most daunting part of like, where do I start? Is it going to take all my money up front? Do I need any money? There's a lot of ways out there that you can get financing, especially with investors. There is a lot of investor specific loan products out there. They can be a little bit more complicated. So I would suggest maybe sticking to some of these routes. One of them being your traditional conventional mortgage that you can get through your local mortgage department. And then creative financing, going maybe the hard money lender route. So if you maybe don't have good enough credit to get another traditional mortgage, or you already have a mortgage and you just have that debt to income that's maybe stopping you, talking to a hard money lender can be another good option, especially if you plan on getting a high return. Paying those extra interest rates that sometimes they can charge can still be worth it in the long run. Going the joint venture route. So this is essentially partnering with somebody who already has the capital and you taking over everything else, the management, acquiring the properties, getting it fixed up, getting it rented out, all of those things. And then whenever you decide to part ways, you split that money, you take your half, and then you go and put it into your own property. So it's kind of a good way just to start out whenever you don't have your own capital, partner with someone, split the proceeds, and go on your way. And then utilizing something called a HELOC, which is your home equity line of credit. So if you already own a property that is your primary residence, you could take a line of credit out in that equity that's sitting in your house to then put into your investment property and get that money back and replace it. But that's sometimes what a lot of people utilize when they're first getting into investing in that second property, going ahead and just taking a line of credit out of that first one. And then the last strategy, or I guess method that you can utilize for financing would be something called the BRRRR method, which is essentially utilizing the refinancing process. So BRRRR is, buy, you renovate, you rent it out, you refinance it, and you repeat it. So that's a really common strategy that a lot of investors use if you want multiple doors and you're not just wanting to sell and repeat. So for example, I will use this home price to kind of show you how you could use something like the BRRRR method. So we're gonna purchase a home for $160,000. We're gonna use a conventional loan. Sometimes, you can have as many conventional loans as you want. So for this example, we'll do conventional, 5% down, which is the minimum. If you have 20% down, I would suggest going that route because you can get away with not paying your monthly mortgage insurance. So maybe if you have more up front, definitely a good idea, but if you don't have more up front and you'd rather, pay that extra fee monthly, those is kind of your options as far as what you want to put down. But for this example, we do our $8,000 5%, we'll do our 6% interest rate. So this home does need a little bit of work, nothing crazy, but with that being said, we're going to negotiate our seller, pay some of our closing costs. So that's gonna help us save a little bit of money up front. And I don't know if anybody's bought or sold any houses recently, but that's a really common thing. So it might seem crazy that you're asking seller to pay extra money, but it all can be negotiated within your purchase price. If anything, you can always offer a little bit more, so that way you're essentially wrapping in that closing cost into your monthly mortgage. But in this case, we are trying to save as much money up front. So we're going to take the money that we saved from the seller paying that closing cost, which in this case will be roughly about $7,000. We'll put some new paint into the property, we'll fix up some light fixtures, and we'll just give it a new kind of life. And we will rent it out for $1,450, but our monthly mortgage will only be $1,250. And that's typically the average right now with your 6% interest rate. But with the property being fixed up a little bit, it can rent for $1,450 because we crunched those numbers before we bought the property. We did our comparison. And so we know that our cash flow will be around $200 a month minus your expenses. And so 5 years later, with that property still being rented out, we have appreciated nearly 20%, which is pretty average here in Oklahoma if you buy in the right spot. And so your current value will be $192,000. When we first bought the property 5 years ago, it was $160,000. So then you will refinance that property, take out up to 75% of your equity. That's the most that you can take out of your equity when you refinance. And then you will, so that's what this math is right here. So the $142,300 after 5 years, you should be roughly paid down around $10,000 into your principal. So that's where I got that number. After 5 years, that should be about your loan balance. And $192,000 is what your current value is. So you take your value, you minus what you owe on the property, you have $49,700. You're gonna take 75% of that, which is $37,275. And that's already taking out lender fees that are typically accumulated when you do refinance. So that is your net number right there. So then you take your $37,000 and you put it into a new property and you repeat the process. And so sometimes if you don't have extra money to put into a property to fix it up, buying a turnkey property that is already ready to go, that works with this process too. You just, take out the extra R. You just buy, rent, refinance, repeat. So this is a really good way to, get those doors coming without having to put up a bunch of money up front. I mean, you essentially put up $15,000 and then 5 years later, you still have that property and you have $37,000 to put into your next home. Repeat the process. Or you could split that up and buy 2 more homes. There's a lot of ways that you can use that money.
Hannah, on your rents, is it a per room kind of number at this point?
Per room for
Yeah.
what the whole
Yeah,
home is
it's
rented
like
for?
in Stillwater, a college town, like the room rents for about $500. So if you're buying a 3-bedroom house, you're like, okay, I can get this for $1,500.
So if you're going to maybe buy something near a college that you could rent to 3 different people individually, you could maybe go that route financially. Typically, you're gonna utilize the whole home as one house, as a 3-bedroom, and compare it like that. It's hard to do individual leases unless that's the purpose of your home, is specifically kind of like near UCO, they have like Bryant Place, and that's how they do it. They rent out one room at a time. So it kind of depends on how you do. You may be able to get more money out like that, but it's a little bit harder to keep up when you have 3 different tenants in one home or one property. And
I guess I'm kind of asking, like, how do you figure out
what it can rent for?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I would just look at other homes in the immediate area, same size, same rooms, and see what those have been renting for.
So how would we find that?
Oh, you would work, yeah, you could,
Okay.
I mean, you could look on Zillow, or you could
Okay.
partner with a realtor, that can help you kind of crunch those numbers for you, which I would recommend, just because especially if you're going to start attaining more properties, it can get hard to, crunch all those numbers, but definitely, finding someone who is either a seasoned investor or a realtor, that can help you. But a good rule of thumb is typically somewhere around $1 per square foot. That can kind of help you kind of decide. But of course, depending on the area, you can get a lot more or less. So for this example, just to kind of show you what your rate of return is, after 5 years, you gained $32,000 just in that appreciation. So when you bought your house, it was worth $160,000, but now 5 years later, it's worth $192,000. So just in appreciation, you got $32,000, while also accumulating $6,600 in your cash flow. So you were paying your mortgage every single month, but you were also getting additional money every month. And so that's your 200 you were getting times your 60 months, which was the last 5 years. And then this 45% here is typically like a standard rule that you would go by to save every month, to put aside for your expenses on the house, save for any vacancies, any turnover rates, any kind of, unexpected things that can come up. If you're not putting that money aside, it can be a rude awakening when you get that call that your roof is falling through, or all kinds of things. So this $6,600 is actually already with that 45% taken out. So that's just in your cash flow. So that's $38,600 altogether in your total revenue. And of course, to find your ROI, you divide your revenue divided by your initial investment, which in this case was the $15,000. You put your $8,000 down, put your $7,000 into fixing it up, and then times by 100, you have a 257% ROI. Which for real estate, anywhere around 200% is good. In this case, I think it is a little bit higher because we did negotiate that initial closing cost down. So, just trying to stay around somewhere with 200 of a ROI when thinking about real estate is a really good number. So I just wanted to show you that example of how you could utilize that process. And so now we talk about, managing those properties and then how you would scale them. So, I mean, like you said, your sister manages yours. I know, Clayton, you used to manage your own rental properties. It can get a lot. So, just a couple things to consider, emotional ties. When it's your property, it's your money, you're dealing with your tenants, and they have their sob stories and they haven't paid their rent in a few months. It's a lot easier to feel that obligation to kind of be a little bit more lenient, and the money is yours, you have that decision. And when you're hiring a third party to take over that for you, you know that you're not really gonna have any of those problems. It's not their money, they just know they're in charge to protect your property and to get your money, and you don't have to worry about that aspect. And then of course all those late night maintenance calls, being in the middle of your Thanksgiving dinner and they're calling you about your frozen pipes and
Plug toilet.
yeah, plug toilet, you got your plunger in the back. And so your maintenance calls, your property manager will take care of that for you as well. That's why you have your reserves already on hand. You have your contract with that manager. They have access to that money when they need it, but you always get your monthly bill so you can see everything. You're not thinking, oh, I'm just giving them all my money and I don't know where it's going. You will still be involved with seeing those dollars, but you don't have to have a call every time to say, hey, can I take, $200 out to fix the whatever. And then of course dealing with evictions, another not very fun process. You gotta get your sheriffs involved, go to court, do a bunch of stuff. So having a property manager, which most people charge anywhere between 8 to 12% of your rental income. Again, I did factor that into that 45%. And to me, that's worth it, worth the stress and all the hassle that they take over for you. But to each their own. Maybe if you just have one property, you think it's a little bit easier for you to manage, go ahead and do it yourself. It may be really good to get hands-on and to really get in there to see what that's like. But then once you get to 5, maybe 7, 10 properties, it may be a little bit harder to, do those managing and, getting everybody's rent every month and all of those things. So those systems and maintenance, tenant screening, those are really important too. Every year you do your walkthrough of the property, make sure it's still in one piece. That's actually something that a lot of people consider whenever discussing an Airbnb versus a long-term property. Airbnbs, you're in there every 5 days, once a week. You're checking on that property, it's getting clean, you're on it. So a lot of those times the quality and the care of those homes can go a lot longer than maybe if you haven't been to the home in a year. A lot can happen. So that's just something that some people kind of take into consideration. Then of course, obtaining those tenants, going through the application process, doing the background checks, all of those things, collecting the rent. It's also something that your management will, take care of for you. And then of course, scaling, acquiring more properties while keeping it passive. So you still have those properties that are giving you your rent every month, but you're taking your equity and you're putting it into another one. So you're still getting more properties, but you're not having to lose on the passive income you're getting from the other properties in order to do so. So your toolkit. These are definitely things that you're gonna need to have a successful investment journey. These are things that I would definitely try to find before you go ahead and buy that first property. One of them, like Mindy was asking, your real estate agent. Someone like me, of course, I would love to help you, but if anything, find someone who has experience with investing, whether that's an agent or just another investor. They will help you acquire those properties, analyze the deals, crunch those numbers for you, because if it's not something you do every day, you don't really know what you're looking for. And then of course your property manager. So if that is the route you want to take, you definitely want to, find someone you trust. They're going to take care of all the hassle and stress of managing those properties for you.
Could that be one and the same? It could be your real.
Yeah, it could
'Cause
be
you
one
do
and the
some
same.
of those, right?
I don't
Oh, you
do
don't?
property management,
Alright.
no.
Is
But
your
some people
company-
do.
Is your company, some of the people in your company?
Yeah, I partner with a property
Okay.
manager for sure, and I trust him a lot. But that's what he does. He does his day in, day out managing, and then when they're ready to buy or sell, that's what I do. And then of course your insurance agent. So once you acquire all these properties, you want to make sure that they are protected and insured the right way. They can help you, bundle and bind all of those landlord policies. Make sure you're covered. You're not missing out on anything, and definitely not overpaying. And then an LLC or a trust. So again, making sure these assets are protected, whether that is an individual LLC for each property or a parent LLC with all of them underneath. Making sure they're protected, because the last thing you want is one of your tenants to slip and fall and sue you, and next thing you know, your primary residence is getting taken, your 5 other residential properties are getting taken. So having those in assets, and of course like a trust, protecting it for any family, it's a lot easier to transfer it to somebody, whether that's selling or partnering with another investor. So keeping those protected, very, very essential. And then your money lender. So whether that is your hard money lender, whether that's your local bank that you work with, whether that's your traditional local mortgage lender. So whichever route you try to go, having that good trusting relationship is so important, because sometimes all the numbers may not make sense, all of your credit may not make sense, but if you've done business and you have built that good faith with them, they're a lot more inclined to help you later on down the line because they trust you. And of course your maintenance man. So this can be, a one-stop shop. This can be having your electrical guy, having your roof guy, having those in place ahead of time can save you so much stress when you're not just calling a million HVAC guys on the weekend to see who can get in, and then they overcharge you and don't do a good job anyway. So yeah, definitely someone you trust to actually take care of your property, very important. And then your closing
Especially
agent.
if you don't live in the same town.
Especially if you don't live in the same town. You can't check on it and see it for yourself, and you just have to trust their word for it. Yeah. So your title agent. So having a good title agent that will protect you from any hidden liens, abstract issues, or closing delays. So in Oklahoma, for example, we are one of the few states who do something called an abstract, which is essentially the history of the title ownership of a property. It's literally on paper, written down, everybody who's ever owned the property. It's kept down in City Hall. But sometimes if a property's been owned for 30, 40 years, there isn't that abstract that's been done. And so sometimes if you don't have a good title agent, they won't notice something like that until maybe the day before closing. And then they have to build an entire abstract last minute, and it can cause a lot of stress and hassles. So making sure you have a good title agent is also really important, and a lot of people don't really think about that. And then of course your tax advisor. So tax advisor helps you maximize those deductions, ensures you're staying compliant, informed, making sure you're not missing out on any money, making sure you're not gonna get in trouble. And of course, I mean, as business owners, you know tax time can get really hard. So having someone that you know you trust and that specializes in helping investors with those assets and those properties, really crucial as well. Some common mistakes to avoid. So over leveraging, sometimes you can fall in love with a property and it doesn't really have enough rental income to cash flow, and you're kind of breaking even every month. And maybe that can be your goal if the property you know will appreciate tremendously over time. But if you want that cash flow, which you do want, making sure you're not over leveraging is really important. And then again, not factoring in those vacancies. Whenever you have someone moving out, you have to clean it up, you have to get it ready. You don't have anybody in there paying your monthly bills anymore. So factoring in those vacancies, those repairs, and of course the property management expenses. And then ignoring your market trends. So not selling, for example, when prices start to decline, which is kind of unlikely right now. You know, we really are on an up spike with appreciation, but having, for example, an agent or someone who treats your properties like an asset, like you would stocks and bonds. You watch it all the time, you see where it sits in the market. It's just as important to watch where your home is sitting and to know when to sell or maybe when to refinance. So not paying attention to those market trends can really shoot you in the